They say a man's home is his castle, but apparently my backyard was just a glorified holding tank for the neighborhood's bad decisions. I didn't realize I'd signed up to be the community reservoir until I started finding actual tadpoles in my rose bushes. And honestly, if I wanted to live in a swamp, I would have moved to the Everglades instead of dealing with a bunch of self-important paper pushers who thought their parking lot runoff was my problem. It started small, just a little damp patch by the back fence after a decent downpour, and for a few days I just shrugged it off because, hey, the spring weather is weird and soil holds moisture, right? But then it started getting greedy, creeping further into the grass like it had an eviction notice for my lawn, and before I knew it, I had a full-blown marsh on my hands. I'm standing there, my boots sinking into what used to be a nice patch of fescue, watching a mosquito the size of fighter jets circle my head, and I just had that feeling in my gut, that someone's trying to screw me feeling. So I walked down to the fence line, pushed through some brush, and sure enough, there it was. Somebody had gone out there with a shovel or a piece of heavy equipment and carved a trench, a deliberate little finger pointing directly into my yard, acting like a straw for every drop of water that landed on the HOA Clubhouse parking lot up the hill. I looked up at that big, paved expanse of asphalt sitting at the top of the slope, and it all clicked. They had a flooding problem. Their landscaping improvement was really just a cheap way to offload their mess onto me. And they probably figured I was just some quiet guy who wouldn't notice until my foundation started cracking. The next morning, I called the management office, feeling like a reasonable person trying to solve a reasonable problem, and the guy on the other end gave me this rehearsed, condescending spiel about regional drainage patterns and landscaping project efficiency, basically telling me that because my yard was the lowest point, it was my natural duty to drown. I'm not a lawyer, but I know how gravity works, and I know the difference between rain falling on my land and some suit deciding to weaponize stormwater for his own convenience. So I decided to stop playing the nice neighbor card and started playing the lawyer's best friend card instead. I spent the next few weeks documenting everything, taking photos, recording videos of the water actually rushing through that man-made trench like a mountain stream, keeping a log of the mud depth, and eventually I pulled the trigger and hired a civil engineer. A guy who looked at the situation for about 30 seconds, shook his head, and handed me a report that basically called the HOA a bunch of idiots in formal, expensive language. He used the term improper storm water diversion, which sounded like a headache for someone else, so I sent that report over to the board with a polite but firm request to fix their mess before I made it everyone's problem, and of course they ignored it. 2 weeks went by, a storm hit, and I watched the water pour back into my yard, filling it up like a kiddie pool for a giant, and that's when I realized that asking nicely was for people who didn't have a plan. I called the city's storm water compliance office, and the inspector who showed up was one of those guys who loves rules more than he loves his own family. He walked the length of that trench, followed it all the way up the hill to the clubhouse, and looked at the HOA manager with this look of absolute disappointment, asking, "Where is the permit for this?" The answer was silence, because obviously they hadn't bothered to get one, which meant the whole operation was illegal, unauthorized, and totally doomed. Now, the inspector told them they had to fix it, but he also gave me a little nugget of information, a loophole, really telling me that if they dragged their feet, I was fully within my rights to protect my property from artificial runoff. That was all the green light I needed. I didn't want to play their game of waiting for them to act, so I called a contractor I trust, and we didn't just build a wall, we built a redirect. We put in a sturdy, low-profile retaining berm right along the property line, buried deep and graded with the kind of mathematical precision that would make a surveyor blush, and we set it at an angle, just a subtle little nudge to the left, calculated to send that water right back where it came from. The next time it rained, I stood by my back door with a coffee in my hand, watching the drama unfold. The water came rushing down their trench, hit my berm like it had run into a brick wall, and took a sharp, beautiful detour, flowing right back up the slope and onto the asphalt of their beloved clubhouse parking lot. It was glorious, watching that water pool exactly where it used to before they decided I was their drainage solution. The office guys were scrambling, the parking lot was turning into a pond, and within a week, they had engineers out there, real professionals this time, installing underground pipes and proper drainage catchments, because suddenly their landscaping project wasn't so convenient anymore. The trench was filled in, the grass was reseeded, and I sat on my porch watching them spend thousands of dollars to fix a problem they created, feeling a level of satisfaction that only comes from outmaneuvering someone who thought they were smarter than you. It's funny how fast people find the budget for things when their own carpet gets wet, isn't it? But it makes me wonder how many other people are out there just eating the cost of someone else's laziness because they think they don't have a choice. We're told to be good neighbors, to keep the peace, but there's a thin line between keeping the peace and just being a doormat. And I'm curious where you draw that line. Have you ever had to fight back when someone else's problem became yours? Or do you think I went too far by giving them back the flood? I'd love to hear your take on what constitutes real justice in the neighborhood. So drop a comment below and tell me how you'd handle a situation where the rules are on your side, but common sense seems to have left the building.